we knew that a 558 or construction defect lawsuit was going to happen as soon as turnover happened from the developer control to the association. So what we tried to do was draft into the contract with the contractor protections in those circumstances, right? You want to try to address those issues before you do a turnover, so that when you turn over, you're not complaining about a structural issue, you're complaining about whether or not a light switch was in the right location, which is an easy fix, right? Those are the distinctions you try to make. On top of that, you try to have a good contractor and a reputable contractor that's going to stand by their product and make sure that warranties are there and indemnification provisions are in the contract to protect you if you're a developer in that aspect as well.
Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Jason Muth here with straightforward short-term rentals and pride-away stays. And we have two attorneys once again on the podcast. We are living up to our law name, Rory. First, we'll introduce Rory Gill, who's attorney right here in New England. Welcome, Rory.
Great. And we get to have a different legal perspective on here today. I mean, it's a returning champion from Haber Law, but we are going to be discussing a little bit of construction and real estate law and how it differs from what we're used to here in the Northeast, and how it's working for them down in Miami, Florida.
Yeah, it's always nice to get different perspectives, especially when, here there's no leaves on the trees. There's snow on the ground in New Hampshire where I'm recording this. Rory's at our studios in Newburyport. We're once again going to the sunny skies and beautiful palm trees of South Florida and Haber Law in Miami. I know that, Alex, you live this every single day, and we look forward to going to warm climates. And, this is the world that you live in. But let's introduce our guests. We're going to talk about construction law today, some condo law, and learn about some of the unique challenges that buyers and builders and everyone has to face, when they're putting some real estate projects together. So we should introduce Alex Leone from Haber Law. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Jason, for having me.
Yes, we really appreciate it. Once again, I'm outnumbered by the attorneys here, the real estate attorneys here. And, that's when I kind of take a step back in these conversations, because you guys probably have a lot more intelligent things to talk about. But, we've talked about condo law on this in the past, and condos around the country are, all walks of life. In South Florida, you guys have, lots of taller aging properties. You have lots of taller, newer buildings. We certainly have that in the Northeast, but a lot of our associations are smaller in nature, 3, 6, 12 unit condo associations. But there are some similarities between the two. Alex, tell us a little bit about your background and, how you got started working in the real estate law world.
Sure. So I started practicing law a little bit over 10 years ago, working in the litigation space. About 7 years ago, I transitioned over to construction law specifically. I was doing mostly construction defect litigation. And then about 2 years after that, I started representing developers almost exclusively for about 5 or 6 years. And then I've now come back around and started representing associations and developers and contractors and designers in a more transactional aspect of my practice. But the litigation aspect helped educate my transactional practice and vice versa. So it allows me to be in a unique position where I've represented kind of everybody on the side of the deal, and fought about a lot of these deals and these issues in court. So it allows me to give clients a unique perspective and an effective perspective, I think.
So if, the bulk of your clients are professionals in the space, in one capacity or another, how do you go out and, build a reputation and build a client base of professionals?
So what I try to do is get involved with professional organizations, right? So like down here, the Latin Builders Association is a great organization that connects builders and developers, and as well as representatives for condo associations, et cetera. So I work with them. Next year, I'll be involved in the Urban Land Institute's Leadership Academy. So I'll be working with industry professionals across all aspects of the real estate space and tackling unique challenges that are presented to the Urban Land Institute down here in South Florida, so that we can try to come up with some creative solutions. So working with industry professionals, maintaining a good relationship with those people, because you never know when they're going to be your colleague or your ally as opposed to your adversary. So that's how I do it.
What do you miss about the litigation?
I miss the intensity and the excitement of going to court and trial and getting ready to present an argument. I don't miss the long hours or the adversarial nature where it becomes contentious. But that being said, just because I don't do it anymore doesn't mean I don't know what's going on in the litigation space. A lot of my colleagues here at Haber Law, handling those kinds of cases regularly. So a lot of times they'll ask me to come in and analyze a contract or give my perspective on a particular argument. So I'm still in it, but just not at the front line, so to speak.
Yeah. It's probably experience you could bring to some of the clients that you're working with in a less adversarial nature, who are just building projects. If you were to engage a client from the start, like what are some of the initial things that a builder for a condo development, what are some questions that you might ask them or some initial legal things that they might have to consider when they're about to break ground?
Do you mean a developer or do you mean a contractor? Because the perspectives for each of them are different. So I'll answer both, I guess. So if I'm representing a developer client who's looking to develop here in South Florida, I usually ask them who's working on your land use side, because we don't have that here at Haber Law. Who's doing your entitlements, who's doing your approvals, because that's vital, right? Before we even get to the actual construction contract. Then my next question is who's doing your design? Is your architect, where are they at with their construction documents? So I know kind of timing as to when we can engage a contractor. And then ultimately your budget, what kind of project you're building, where, et cetera. That's really the information I need to know in order to provide proper advice, right? And obviously the asset class is important, right? If it's a condominium versus a commercial rental, it's completely different considerations. If it's an affordable housing development, there's completely different legal implications there. So that's what I do when I talk to a developer client. When I talk to a contractor, I ask somewhat of the similar questions, but besides the entitlement aspect and the approval aspect, I ask kind of what the asset class is, who you're working with, who your subs are, where are the design documents, so that we know kind of the timing of it. And then ultimately, what are the developer requirements, right? Is there a lender involved? Which that's a question for both the developer and for the builder, because sometimes they're self-financed, sometimes they go out and get financing. So all of those questions are similar across both of the clients, but with a different perspective, right? Because from a builder perspective, I'm not so concerned about the entitlement aspect, but from a developer perspective, I need to know kind of, is this project about to break ground, or is it like a year and a half or 2 years out from getting the approvals?
I think a lot of people who might be listening to this are aspirational with their real estate investing, right? A lot of people might want to flip homes or develop some larger projects. Talk about some of the things that what makes a good client, like where a client will approach you saying, hey, listen, like we're looking, Alex, for you to do X for us, or we have this project that we're thinking about. As someone that might want to develop real estate, what can one do to be better prepared to have some of those initial conversations with you?
Sure. So from a development perspective, a good client is a sophisticated client, right? Somebody that knows all aspects of their deal, knows where their money's coming from, knows where their budget is, knows what their timing is. The last thing you need when I'm talking to clients is they don't know the answer to a very vital question with regards to their project, right? And that doesn't mean that I can't represent them. Obviously, like I can help guide them and help, assist them in finding that answer or connecting them with the right people that can give them that answer. That's really what I'm looking for from a developer perspective. Somebody that knows what they're doing, at least at some level. And if they want to scale up, that's certainly something I can help them with. But ultimately, the developers come down here a lot to South Florida in particular, and they think that it's going to be the same as their home town, where if they're coming from the Northeast or New York or Boston or anywhere else, right? They think that it's the same down here, and that's not the case. And sometimes, as long as they're coming with information and an open mind to be advised, then that's usually the way that clients work best. Now, when it comes to builders, what I try to tell my clients is, look, my goal is to advise on the risks on a particular deal. My goal is to advise you where the pitfalls are, but ultimately, I'm trying to stay out of the way of your business. Like, you have to make a business decision. You have to make a decision on your end whether you want to take on that particular project, whether what you want to expose yourself on the bond capacity that you have, or the insurance you're carrying, et cetera. And that's ultimately your decision. But I try to advise you whether or not I think it's a smart decision or inadvisable decision. That's my role as a counselor at the end of the day.
I want to ask about some of those misperceptions of people coming in from out of the market. I know even here in the Northeast, one state to another, there are a lot of differences. And if you're used to one jurisdiction, you can get completely flustered and thrown off in the other with bad assumptions. What are some of the misperceptions that the out of region developers have when they come to you?
Well, it's really just a matter of relationships, right? If you come down here and you have no relationships in government or in the design space or the builder space or the entitlement space, it's very difficult to get things moving, right? Because ultimately, this South Florida in particular is ripe for development. There's a lot of capital coming down here, but that's really the main issue, right? Is having the relationships with people, the connections to politicians or government approval authorities, et cetera, to be able to push along your project as needed. And certainly, Florida is trying to become better about that, and with the advent of the Live Local Act and a couple of other legislations that have come down here. But ultimately, that's really the main thing. Having a local counsel for an out-of-state developer is vital. Even if you have a development counsel or a construction counsel that you work with pretty regularly, just having somebody with boots on the ground that knows the players, right? That's the main difference. I've seen time and time again that developers are frustrated when they come down here because they think that it's going to work the same way as when they have back at home, and that's just not the case. And ultimately, when it comes to budget analysis in particular, knowing the local players, knowing the suppliers, the builders, the contractors that are going to be bidding on your project, you get a better understanding of pricing. But that obviously depends on the size of the developer too, because if you're the bigger developers that are doing in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a little different than doing a $1 or $2 or $3 million project. So it really just depends on the client and depends on the circumstances, but that's where I would focus my attention on.
Rory, it's in Florida, it's Florida, right? It's a large state, all right? Miami's, very South Florida. Obviously, the jurisdictions are very different throughout the state as well. But, Rory, you're in a situation where we in Newburyport can drive 30 minutes and have been through three different states, right? Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And, even though it's within, a quick drive, the jurisdictions are very different in situations like that. And there's a lot of situations across the country where, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, I mean, you could be in those three states within an hour. There's a lot of places that people, states border one another. People are operating across those borders, and the laws are very different there, wouldn't you say?
More than that, you have hundreds of different towns in that same radius that each are going to have very different personalities and regulations. When it comes to zoning in particular, but any kind of approval that relates to land use and development, you have kind of your objective criteria. These are the things that you need to have to be able to build as of right. But we know that that's not where the conversation really ends. There are a lot of discretionary approvals that are given by different local authorities and boards. And that's why even here, you want the council that is well known and understands that particular locality, even if that town only has 5,000 people in it. You want to engage somebody who's familiar with that town, familiar with those people on those approval boards, and really understands the culture there. And as I said, there are hundreds of different ones here. So I think that's what Alex is discussing a little bit there with the need to have local counsel that understands not only the objective criteria that are laid out in the regulations, but the relationships and the people that are going to be making the decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get at, right? Because even in Florida in particular, and I keep on saying South Florida because now with the influx of capital here, Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade County, that tri-county area has kind of been considered as one and the same, right? South Florida is all, booming right now. But if you go just a little bit north to Orlando or just a little bit west to Tampa, those are two other completely different jurisdictions that your relationships in South Florida have really nothing to do with those counties in Tampa and Orlando. So you have to have local counsel that kind of allows you to bridge the gap and have relationships with people all over the state. That's unique. Obviously, that's not common. Most practicing attorneys, whether you're in real estate or construction or any real practice, you're not really practicing in Florida outside of a few jurisdictions. So being able to have that far-reaching Rolodex, so to speak. And I know I'm dating myself with that reference, but having that Rolodex where you have relationships with people and professionals across the state is vital for any kind of development, especially depending on the market you want to build in, obviously.
I think we can still use Rolodex, right? I mean, that term is fine. I think people do get it, but that might be one of those terms that, 20 somethings that are coming up in the world are like, You're talking about a Rolodex. Like, what is a
Yeah.
Rolodex? I mean, you save a document, and if you're using Microsoft Word, which I mostly use Google Docs these days, but Microsoft Word still has that little like disk, that floppy disk as the way to save it. And there's probably
Yeah.
some people that are saying, what is that icon? That doesn't mean anything to me.
When I was
Dating
growing up,
ourselves.
Rolodexes were pretty common. So now I still use that phrase, but I guess it's the contacts now in your phone. That's the best way to do it, the best way to reference it. And
Yeah.
Jason, you mentioned something before that I wanted to touch on. Besides developers and builders, obviously we have a large list of condo clients and association clients that we have to treat almost the same, right? Like they have remediation projects that are complex and are high budget items. I have one client in particular that is doing a $33 million construction remediation project just because of the size of the condominium and the complexity of the project. And as a result of that, a $33 million project is big and sophisticated for anybody, for any developer across the country, much less a condo association of volunteers and unit and homeowners. Those kinds of deals, and I'm seeing them more and more, especially after the unfortunate incident of Champlain Towers. The laws changed, and now associations are required to do these remediation projects. And as a result, some of these associations, unfortunately, have left that remediation process for a long time. So it's created more and more dollars that need to get funded into those projects. So when you have a condo association who's doing a, project that's in the 7 or 8 figures, you have to treat them as, from an attorney's perspective and from a budgeting perspective, you have to treat those associations as if they are sophisticated developers, and you have to counsel them as such, because that kind of project requires construction financing, requires a project manager, requires designers, several designers, requires several contractors and subcontractors, and managing of that paperwork is vital for the success, right? Because at the end of the day, every single developer, whether you're an association doing a remediation project or a developer or doing a ground up construction, they want projects done on time and on budget. And how do you do that? You make sure that the proper paperwork is done on the front end, and you have established certain relationships. And that's what my role is here at the firm, right? I work on all the construction contracts that come through here, whether it's for a developer, builder, or for a condo association, and I try to provide that value in drafting the contract, so it is both a sword and a shield, and you use it as you need to, right, depending on the circumstances, because projects inevitably have problems, and you have to be ready to deal with them in an efficient and effective way.
Earlier, Jason asked you what makes a great client, and you mentioned clients that know their figures, know their information, that are sophisticated. You sense a tension here with those condo associations where the condo boards may not have that same level of sophistication that a developer client has. How do you go about educating those clients and really advocating on their behalf when they are not necessarily development minded in the first place?
That's a great question, Rory, and I deal with this almost daily. Condo boards are, as you know, in your practice, they're made up of volunteers, right? And in your circumstance with smaller units of 3, 4, or 5 units, that's easier, right? Because you have like 2 or 3 people that know your neighbors. But when you have a 200 or 300 unit condominium, a lot of times these boards are become very contentious, and how they're elected or becomes contentious, and they're trying to do their best for the association most of the time, but not always, right? And there's always infighting and problems that happen. My role as counsel is always to come in and really just kind of explain to them, as if I were explaining it to someone who is unsophisticated, because although some of these luxury condominiums down here have people on the board that are experienced in construction or in development, not always. So I have to come in and explain, okay, well, that's why this provision in the contract matters. That's why it's important. I've used my litigation experience from before I was a transactional attorney to be able to explain that and say, okay, well, I've litigated this particular issue, and this is how it works out. So having to explain it, that's really the difference in my practice when I'm representing a developer versus a condo association. It's that when I explain to them, to a developer, for example, why I care so much about a particular insurance or a particular indemnification provision, they understand it, right? They get it. They've been through the battle, so to speak. Whereas a condo association, this is the most complex project most of the time that they've ever dealt with in their lives. Think about in your personal lives, how often do you do a large remediation of your home, for example? That doesn't happen for most people. So when I come in and I explain to a condo association or a board, I'm explaining from a position of trying to make it as simple as possible, but also letting them know, okay, well, these are the risks involved. These are the pros and cons of this particular provision, and why it works and why it doesn't work. So to answer to, you address the what makes a good client, condo boards, when they are good condo board clients, it's when they rely upon my information, right? They understand that they are not an expert in the field. They're an expert in their respective personal lives, but not in this life. So being able to rely upon consultants, rely upon attorneys, rely upon project managers, et cetera, that those are the good condo boards, because they, at the end of the day, that's what protects them. When they're making a decision based upon advice and counsel, they're protected from liability as a condo board.
When you're buying a condo, like in a city like Boston, you don't think about these things. You're looking at the unit, right? Maybe you're kicking the tires on some of the books for the association, but what sells you is the sexiness of the kitchen and the layout and the footprint and all that kind of thing.
All the
I can
amenities,
think of all the amenities. Absolutely. I can think of two situations. One, I just bumped into a friend this past weekend whose condo building burned down, 30-unit building. All right. It's taken over a year, not to the ground, but like fire damage to the point that everyone had to move out. And it's been, 14, 15 months, and it just sounds like a bit of a nightmare. And I saw some other friends at a wedding a couple weeks ago, and they were asking me questions because for some reason people always think that I'm the attorney. I'm like, no, Rory's the attorney. Remember, I'm just on the podcast as well. So ask them these questions, but I could relay them over to Rory. And but these friends were having some issues with the developer that built their building, and they realized that there was some problems with the insulation or sound attenuation or plumbing between the units. And the developers kind of washed his hands of it at this point, and now it's on the association. And some of them are having a hard time reselling their units as a result of something that I'm probably not articulating correctly. Mm-hmm. However, in both those situations, it reminds me how important it is to really dig into the stability of the condo association itself and to work with the board and to understand that you're not just buying a beautiful unit in a great building in an awesome city, whatever those three variables are. Mm-hmm. You're buying your way into basically a business. A volunteer business of people who actually have to figure out a way to get along and go forward if really bad things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So buying a condo down here is, and when I say down here for your listeners in South Florida, it's a unique investment, right? Because you have to consider, especially now, considering the aging condominium problem that we have down here in Florida, in particular in South Florida, especially. You have to consider not only the unit that you're buying, but also the books that the condo association is keeping, the accounting, where they are with assessments, so that you understand how funded the association is for maintenance perspectives, and as well as you also have to think about, well, if it's a newer condominium, who built it, right? Who's the developer? Who's the contractor? And if you have a good understanding of if it's a reputable person behind that or company behind that, then you can kind of have some peace of mind when it comes to buying a unit. But Jason, you brought up an example of a what we call down here a construction defect, right? Like there's an insulation issue or something that should have been addressed by the developer. That happens all the time. Every single multifamily development down here has a litigation usually attached to it as soon as it gets turned over from developer control to association control. And my colleagues here at the office do that almost exclusively, right? Our construction defect department specializes in that kind of what we call 558 disputes, because it's Chapter 558 in Florida law. But it's a construction defect dispute. The developer builds a building and then turns it over to association control, and then the association is responsible to hire an engineer to investigate to see if the project that they were promised is delivered, right? And if there's any defects, you have to litigate about that. When it's a reputable developer with a good builder in a luxury market, sometimes it's not very much, right? It's not a big ticket item, and there's sometimes that it becomes a very, very big problem. I know from my past life and when I was a litigator, there was a project that was built in Palm Beach County. The developer built it in a way where, and not to get too technical, but essentially the way they built it, water was infiltrating behind the stucco underneath the windows and damaging the wood structure underneath the stucco, where if you're buying it from the outside, you would never see that damage because it's behind stucco. You wouldn't see it. But as soon as you open the stucco, it was rotted wood underneath. And these are, people's homes at the end of the day. And we're talking about a $30-something million construction defect case that we ended up settling for a good amount of money for the client on the third day of jury selection. But yeah, those kinds of cases happen a lot more frequent than people report about in the news. But that's something that any buyer has to be concerned about when you're coming down here to South Florida and Florida in general. You have to do your research, not only about the unit that you're buying, but also the building itself, right? What the funding, as well as what the status is of any potential construction defects and what complaints the unit owners are having. And if it's an older condominium in particular, what is the assessment that's on the horizon? If there's a certificate, a 30-year, 40-year, 50-year certification coming up, what is the rough order of magnitude of those remediations so that you understand kind of what you're buying into? Because for that client I mentioned to you earlier that was doing that $33 million construction remediation project, I can only imagine how difficult it must be for a unit owner to come in and have bought a unit, let's say a year and a half ago, or just before Champlain Towers, and the law changes in Tallahassee, and now you're faced with an assessment in the six-figure range, and you had no idea how you were buying into that. And it's an unfortunate, tough situation, but we obviously are in a position to be able to counsel not only buyers but sellers and condos and developers and the like in between.
Let's flip the perspective on that around a little bit. If these suits are so common as to almost be automatic, what does a developer do to prepare for this and to anticipate the inbound lawsuits against them after they turn over the property?
Before I joined Haber Law, I worked for a firm that almost exclusively represented developers in my practice. So we thought about that and talked about that pretty regularly. We knew that a 558 or construction defect lawsuit was going to happen as soon as turnover happened from the developer control to the association. So what we tried to do was draft into the contract with the contractor protections in those circumstances, right? You want to try to address those issues before you do a turnover, so that when you turn over, you're not complaining about a structural issue, you're complaining about whether or not a light switch was in the right location, which is an easy fix, right? Those are the distinctions you try to make. On top of that, you try to have a good contractor and a reputable contractor that's going to stand by their product and make sure that warranties are there and indemnification provisions are in the contract to protect you if you're a developer in that aspect as well. So I don't need to tell you this, but there's plenty of times where there's disputes that happen between the developer and the contractor while a project is happening that get resolved and fixed before turnover happens. So the goal is to try to limit the amount of disputes that are on the horizon with an association, as opposed to try to handle it within the four corners of the contract with your builder. That's the best way that I could counsel developers, and ultimately, the more you resolve it and the better product you deliver to your association, eventually, the less likely that you're going to have any issues.
Before we get to our final questions, I have one that I just thought of that I've never asked this question before. I'm curious as to what your answer is going to be. AI is talked about a lot in the world for lots of different reasons, good and bad. Alex, can you talk about how you guys have used AI to your benefit at Haber Law or yourself? And also mention why AI won't replace what you do.
It's a really good question. I mean, it's really an existential question. Attorneys are attorneys and a lot of professionals are considering the implications of AI across their practice as well as their profession, right? So I don't think that, although I think AI is valuable in for example, I'm sure Rory can tell you from his practice, getting a demand letter out or doing basic research. It gives you a kind of a starting point on what to do, but ultimately you need an attorney to come in and kind of refine it or apply it to a specific set of facts to be able to do whatever it is you need to do on a particular project. In the construction space, I admittedly have not. I've been seeing and reading articles about how AI is being used by builders and developers to make building more efficient and make it more cost effective. But at the end of the day, when it comes to drafting of a contract and negotiating a provision or a business provision or counseling a client, AI simply can't do that. You go in front of a condo association and you can't really input a prompt into ChatGPT and have them explain to you why a particular provision matters in the context of the South Florida market with precedent and the relationship with the contractor and the reputation in the industry. That just doesn't do that. It can compile some information and give you sort of a summary in some circumstances, but it doesn't explain things the way that human touch does, unfortunately. Fortunately and unfortunately, frankly, because I do think it's valuable. It does get us started on a particular issue. It has a starting point, but it doesn't do all the work. And ultimately, attorneys or people or humans in general have to kind of come in and massage the product from AI to make it helpful to other people.
Yeah. I use AI for a couple things, mostly copywriting and ideas, for the
Right.
marketing that we do for our businesses. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, sometimes you'll ask it to write something because it helps with the blank page syndrome. Where do
Yeah.
I start?
Yeah.
And it'll give you something to start with, and then you have to massage it into your voice to make it sound human, because sometimes the language just sounds so over the top, like no one speaks this way, right? But I did use AI this past weekend where I was looking for some thought prompters for some short videos I recorded for Instagram Reels for Pride Away Stays, one of our businesses. And you put in some prompts and it spits back. I asked for 40 and it gave me a list of 40 things to talk about, and I'd say that 25 of them were good ideas, right? 15 were like, I'm not going to talk about this, but you needed a human to look at that and say, okay, I want to record videos about these things. And then you kind of need the human still to record the video, because you've mentioned, a lot of legal is relationship based, right? How you get new clients, how, why people hire you because of the network that you have, the Rolodex you have. Why we think people are going to hire us in Provincetown for Pride Away Stays is because of us as humans and who we know and the work that we can do and the credibility that, when you're speaking on a podcast like this, or when you're speaking to a group at a local networking event or on a webinar, people see you and they see you using those words. And
Right.
I think that goes really far when they decide to hire you, because those things can't get replaced unless we're all just droids. And I
Yeah,
don't think they're
of
going
course.
to, I don't think that these bar associations are going to introduce droids into, the local bars.
Yeah. Jason, you make a
Um,
good point. I mean, obviously AI helps with what we've all dealt with in the past, which is that writer's block where you're just, I don't know how to get started on this blank piece of blank piece of
mhm,
paper. How do I get started on this particular issue or idea? I have an idea, but I don't know how to put pen to paper. And that's where I think AI is tremendously valuable. Items that I just don't know how to get started. How do I start this paragraph, or how do I start this motion, or how do I frame this issue? It's very valuable. But one of the things that I do as part of my practice is I negotiate, because of my unique position representing developers and associations both. I negotiate what I call good neighbor agreements or construction impact agreements when there's a development happening right next door, right? Or a association that exists next to your development. I negotiate those and I draft those it's happened quite a bit over the last year or two. But those kinds of things AI just simply can't help with, right? Because AI can't address what a unique association has, what their worries are, what their issues are, what they're concerned about with regards to the development next door. And they certainly can't explain to a developer, hey, look, the association wants you to move your crane 10 feet to the right or deal with this issue. It can't do that without picking up the phone and talking to the person on the other side and explaining that one way or the other. That human touch is not going to go away ever.
yeah. Why don't we get to our final questions that we ask of all of our guests here, just to wrap the interview up and get to know you a little bit better, Alex. These are the questions. First one that we have for you is, if you can get on stage for half an hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, what would that be?
Wow. Besides this podcast, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would probably say the trials and tribulations of learning how to raise two girls. I'm a young father. I have a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, and I've done a lot of work and talking to other young fathers, and that I certainly can talk about my trials and tribulations of that. But I think any parent can, right? Any parent can talk about that issue. So that would be probably where I started. But if when it comes to a specific topic, um, I would say either cooking or triathlon training. Don't let this fool you. I back in the day, I used to train and do triathlons on a regular basis. I haven't done one in many years, but I did it for about 10 years of my life. I could probably talk about that and all the intricacies of the training aspect and gear and things like that. I get very obsessive about it.
Mhm. My hunch is raising two young daughters probably factors into why you're not doing triathlons at this very
Yeah.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that and learning how to practice law at the beginning was one of the, late nights at the office made it very difficult to get up and get on the bike at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, those are all aspects that have changed my life, so to speak.
Rory, we all need to figure out how there can be more than 24 hours in each day, having these children and all these, being attorneys, children, and trying to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Sometimes at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that you have a professional life, you have a personal life, and you have obligations for a social life, and you have to pick two of them. You can't do all three, and that's I found that to be very, very true.
Yeah. Second question. Tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way that you're working today.
That's a good question. I would say my mom's in the real estate space. She's she's not a mortgage broker, a real estate broker for a large real estate company down here and managing several offices. So I think that because I'm an only child, I used to go with her to a lot of appointments, right? I used to go with her to showings and sales and signing contracts and things like that. So being able to see how that transaction happens on a regular basis and how I can see from soup to nuts, like where the property gets marketed and how it gets sold, and then how it gets moved from one buyer to a seller, or one seller to a buyer. That certainly colors my practice now. She would tell you that I've taken the information that she's taught me and kind of made it more sophisticated and taken it to another level. That I think that entire my childhood was spent, Saturdays and Sundays, a lot of times doing open houses with her, putting up signs, things like that. So, that's the unique circumstances when you're an only child of a realtor here in South Florida. But that's what I think colored or made my career today.
See that work ethic a little bit, see what
Yeah.
mom does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a child of immigrants, right? My mom was I'm a first generation American. I was born here, but my mom is an immigrant, and my grandparents are immigrants. So that work ethic and being able to make ends meet and do the work that you need to do to be able to put food on the table for your family, that was very, very telling for me.
Yeah. Only children unite. I'm an only child too. Rory's the only one on here that lays claim to siblings.
Yeah. I mean, now I'm raising siblings, so I get it. I mean, it's a unique thing, right? I see my daughters play with each other, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting dynamic. I always have to ask my wife for advice on that because she has an older sister, so I'm always making sure that I'm playing the right tone here, setting the right tone in my household.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it too. I mean, like I actually can occupy my time really well by myself. I think partly because of, being raised as an only child and, the level of independence that I have. So we'll see how that happens with our daughter Cecily, because, we only have one, and, we find that we occupy her time a lot. We're that play date that, your other daughter can supply.
Exactly.
Final question that we have, tell us something you're listening to or watching or reading these days.
Well, I'm reading the Tools. I watched a documentary on Netflix called Stutz, and Phil Stutz is a psychologist in the Northeast, and his book, The Tools, I'm reading that. I found it to be very enlightening. I like to read a lot of different psychology and philosophy books. In particular, I have a degree in psychology. That's what I got my education in before I went to law school. So I'm always fascinated by that kind of stuff. I'm reading Rick Rubin's, I forgot the title, but it's The Art of Creativity, or the Creative Thinking. I'm reading that as well. As far as listening,
the music producer, Rick Rubin?
Yeah, the music producer.
Okay.
Yeah, I started reading that actually last weekend, and it's been really interesting read, because the mind of a creative thinker is completely different than the mind of a lawyer and an analytical thinker. So I like to kind of explore that aspect of it. As far as listening, I try to listen to music most of the time, mostly different, all genres, but yeah, music on Spotify and other listening aspects of it, and a few different podcasts that deal with mostly sports and entertainment and pop culture and things like that. But that's what I'm listening to. I wouldn't want to give necessarily a plug because there's a lot of different things I listen to, and I can talk for a while about it. But yeah, I try to fill my time when I have free time with listening to a lot of different things and learning as much as I can.
Well, Alex, you've proven that attorneys are well-rounded, right? They're not just,
I try to be.
yeah, it's not just stuffy folks who are just looking at documents all day long and drafting things and going to court.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at documents all day, like you need to fill your time with something else, right? Like
Oh my God.
if I'm out for a run, I try to listen to some podcasts that are just entertaining as opposed to like learning in particular.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'll listen to music on podcasts a lot, and sorry, music on runs a lot. And when I'm at home with my kids, I try to put music on in the background because I was raised in a household full of music, so I like to
Mhm.
make sure that they're listening and well-rounded in their musical taste as well.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Bluey's probably somewhere on your list as well, but if you haven't made it to Bluey yet, it's coming.
Bluey, Coco Melon, Blippy,
Oh
all
yeah.
of those are on in the house pretty regularly. But I try to mix in, some Jay-Z and some
Eh,
Nas and some Miles Davis as well. So I try to mix it all in. So it's all across the spectrum.
somehow our daughter's favorite song right now is "We Will Rock You." So
Okay.
she's, she knows some classic rock.
Mhm.
Alex, thank you for the conversation. This has been fantastic. We're going to put all your links and everything in the show notes so people could reach out to you at Haber Law. Put your LinkedIn on there and everything so they can get a hold of you if they want more information. Rory, where should people get a hold of you if they want more info?
If you just go to rorygill.com, you'll see the different ways to get in touch with me and the different ways I can help you out.
All right. And if you want to get a hold of me or want to be on the podcast, you can go to jasonmuth.com and you can find my email and reach out and let us know what you have to say. And we'll see if we can get you scheduled on the podcast. Alex, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit better and to learn more about some construction law and some of the things that you guys go through in dealing with condo boards and developers and all the crazy corners of the real estate world.
Happy to help you guys. And pleasure meeting you, Rory. Pleasure meeting you, Jason. Looking forward to continuing our relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, we love 5-star reviews and we read all of your comments. So comment away. On behalf of Rory and Alex, thank you so much. I'm Jason, and we'll see you next time.